I'm Judi Lapinsohn. Welcome to today's Levy lecture. We have a very special guest zooming in from London, Leslie Cavendish. Before we get started, I just want to say this Levy lecture is made possible by the Levy Senior Center Foundation and the City of Evanston. We're very lucky to have them both. As always, we appreciate the support for the foundation as we continue to work to connect the community of older adults in Evanston and beyond. I know we have some people logging in today who are not even living in Evanston. One administrative thing before we get started, Leslie will answer questions at the end. Please use the Q&A function, not the raise your hand function, because that won't work. We won't see it. So use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions at any time. We'll get to them at the end. Okay, let me tell you a few things about Leslie Cavendish. He was apprenticed to the iconic 60s hairstylist Vidal Sassoon in 1962, and he became a stylist in his own right 3 years later. He became Paul McCartney's private hairdresser in 1966, which led to cutting the hair of the other Beatles, members of The Who, Bee Gees, Dave Clark 5, James Taylor, Tony Curtis, and more. He attended Beatles recording sessions, and he joined the band on the Magical Mystery Tour film. And he was there for that famous rooftop concert at 3 Savile Row in London. We're going to hear about all of this today. Leslie, welcome.
Thank you, Judi. That's really lovely. And may I just say thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and good luck to the Levi lecture for allowing me to do this talk. I just want to say one other thing, that Judi, you played that song, There Are Places I Remember. When you came to London, I think you left with that in mind.
Absolutely. For those of you watching, I had the pleasure of actually meeting with Leslie and doing a tour in London. So this is really just a treat, and I think you'll all enjoy it a lot. I'm going to move to the next slide and play a part of the video. Leslie, you talked about when we met that you actually saw the Beatles when you were 16 years old. And
I did indeed.
So let's just play. We could go on and we would all enjoy that, but I'd rather hear from Leslie. Tell us about this, about seeing the Beatles at that age, what that meant to you. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, people that are out there, if you're really honest, you can tell me later, how many of you screamed and shouted John, George, Paul, and Ringo? I bet there were a few out there. And one of them was my sister, who happened to have Paul McCartney's photo all around the bedroom wall. Very strange thing happened. I left school at 15. I went into hairdressing, and then there was an advert. There was an advert, believe it or not. My mother used to get the Jewish Chronicle. And no, I never used to read it, but it used to be sent to my aunts in America. And I just looked through the back page, and there I saw the Beatles at the Pigalle, April the 21st, 1963. I couldn't believe it. They had about a couple of #1 hits. They were on the rise. And a couple of friends of mine said, come on, let's go and see them. This is unbelievable. This was on a Sunday night, exclusive to about 150 people. So, it was a very small crowd there. One of the things I admire about Brian Epstein is that his honesty and his integrity. Brian must have signed this contract at least 9 months before. And that 9 months before, the Beatles have now got bigger and bigger. And in 1963, on that same date, April the 21st, at Wembley Arena, beg your pardon, at the Melody Maker Awards, where they have the #1 group, the #1 song, the Beatles appeared in front of 16,000 people at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And when I found that out, I thought, there's no way the Beatles are going to turn up at 10 o'clock at night at a little club with 150 people just off Piccadilly Circus. It wasn't going to happen. We went along there thinking, oh, they're just going to substitute it with another band, which would be understandable. And I'm telling you, no one gave a hint. And at 5 to 10, the curtain opened. Paul came out and went, "Hi, I'm Paul, that's John, that's Ringo, and that's George." And they went into twist and shout, which is quite amazing. Judy, you know this. I think I told you this before, but we'll tell someone else. How long do you think a Beatle concert actually lasted for?
I was just going to ask you, in this scenario, how long did they play?
Well, the funniest thing is Beatle concerts lasted 29 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, so that is nothing. And they played, they had a song set list of about 12, 14 songs, and they would play it whatever they wanted to. They did 4 songs that night, and I left there thinking, oh my God, my sister didn't even come, right? And I went and told her, and then who would have thought for me that 3 years later, or 16, 3 years later, those 4 guys, I would actually be cutting their hair. So that's my very first seeing the Beatles and getting that vibe from them. So, yeah.
Were you also, so you were about 16 at this time.
I was 16 at the time.
Yeah, were you already apprenticing? And I know we're going to get to this in a second. Were you already working at Vidal Sassoon as an apprentice?
Yes. A year before, people may not believe this today, but I left school at 15, and there was an apprenticeship for 3 years at Sassoon. So I'd already done a year apprenticeship. So I'm in my sort of second year, and I was still living at home. Life was exciting. You know, one of the great things that happened, and we'll talk about this a little bit later at Sassoon's, but there was a revolution in fashion with people like Mary Quant with the miniskirt. There was Vidal Sassoon with his haircuts that wasn't sort of bouffanty and lacquer. And then there was the Beatles. And then there was the men, was a change. It was called the peacock fashion at the time. So it was a really great time, but I didn't know it at the time. You didn't realize it. You were just going along with what was happening. So,
I want to mention one thing before we move on. For those who don't remember, Brian Epstein was the Beatles manager at that time, and really was the person who discovered them and managed them for the first
as we said before, Brian Epstein brought them from Liverpool down to London, but he never called them the Beatles. They were always his boys. My boys. We'll get a contract for my boys, and a lot of respect for that.
Okay. So let's move on to another part of the story. This is 1963 to 1968. One thing I want to say before you talk about this is, I remember this time period. I knew who Jane Asher was. I read Tiger Beat magazine. I read Teen Life. I read Rave. Jane Asher was Paul McCartney's girlfriend. And so tell us about working at Sassoon, how you met Jane Asher, and what all that was about.
Okay, so started at 15, and one of the first things that Vidal, we used to have a model night. It used to be a Monday, Tuesday. We used to finish work at 6 o'clock, and I'd probably leave there at 10:30, practicing on different models. And he used to give a talk. One of the first things I remember, which really, really did help me, was he said to everybody, always remember the person you're looking to in the mirror is a client. You don't know what mood they're in, so keep quiet. If they want to talk, that's fine. Don't ask too many questions. Okay, so getting back to Jane Asher, I used to go into the salon, and there'll be people. Sometimes I had to get there 8 o'clock and wash hair, and the stylist had maybe some the fashion editress of Vogue or Queen magazine that had to get into work early, so we had to come in at 8 o'clock, so they were getting to the office at 9:30. Same with some models, and the same with some film stars. So there could be. I remember going in one day. There was Mia Farrow, no makeup on until 1 hour later. This was the exciting thing about hairdressing. You can actually mold someone's beautiful hair. They would do the makeup, and then out comes this wonderful person. But at 8 o'clock in the morning, you don't see it. So we used to go around to different stylists to learn different types of cutting, believe it or not. Some were good at cutting, some were good at styling, some were, then we went into the trichology department, then the tinting department. But one of the guys I worked with, who was the artistic director of Sassoon, a guy called Roger Thompson, who actually at Vidal, he opened up a shop in Madison Avenue. It was Roger Thompson at Sassoon's Madison Avenue. He was terrific. He was a great hairdresser, or shall I say a great hair cutter. But he was also the slowest hairdresser that there was, which at the time I didn't realize that was going to bounce back into my favor. So I used to have to apologize to the clients that he was running late. One of the clients was Jane Asher. We all knew, as you said, that she was Paul McCartney's girlfriend. And there's no way that you go and sit with her at the back wash your hair and say, oh, how's Paul? You know, how's this, how's that? You just keep quiet. She never spoke one iota about Paul McCartney. She would talk about the films that she's doing, which was fine, no problem. So I used to wash her hair. She had beautiful long hair, as you can see, strawberry blonde. It used to take me about 30 minutes to blow dry it. I'll then finish, go over to the stylist and say, Mr. Roger, Jane's ready now for you to go over. He would go over, flick the hair around, then show her the back mirror, and she would say, thank you very much, Roger. Okay, that's fine. When I became a stylist, this is where it backfired on dear Mr. Roger. We used to have something that used to come in and ask for a comb out, which meant you don't make an appointment, you don't want to have your hair done, you want a quick wash, quick blow dry. And with Jane's hair, it was just literally, I promise you, a blow dry, nothing else. And she came in, and Roger, again, being late, his 9 o'clock was 10 o'clock, so and so and so and so. I'm now a stylist. And the receptionist said to me, Leslie, can you do Jane's hair? Do you know how it's done? Roger can't do it. It's fine. Okay. She felt comfortable because she knew I'd be doing her hair. Again, never talking about a boyfriend. I remember talking about, she was filming in Bristol at the time with a Shakespeare company. And then three times she's come in. Again, Roger can't do it. Receptionist said to me, actually, Jane's not very happy because she's been in 3 times. Roger can't do it. Can you do her hair? Which was fine, you know, done it before. Saturday morning, sits down, we'll go through the whole thing, show her the back mirror at the end. And she suddenly just said to me, it was about 1 o'clock actually, and she said, what are you doing in the afternoon? And I did ask why, which she would say that. And I said, why is that? And she said, and I love it. And she said, have you got time to cut my boyfriend's hair? And I thought for a millionth of a second, have I got time to cut your boyfriend's hair? Yes, I have got time to cut your boyfriend's hair.
Yeah.
I asked her what time. She said, whatever suits you. So I made a time. I was getting sort of a bit flustered because I can't let her know that I'm excited that she's asked me to cut Paul McCartney, who's her boyfriend. So I said, yes, fine. Jane, where do you live? So she wrote a bit of paper down. She went, 7 Cavendish Avenue. And I said, Jane, that's my surname. So she said, well, maybe it was meant. So that was my meeting with going over to Paul McCartney. As far as anybody knows, they don't know, but I always regard Mr. Roger the Pete Best of hairdressing. And if anybody doesn't know who Pete Best was, he was the original drummer of the Beatles.
Yeah.
Epstein. In fact, it was actually between John Lennon and George Martin that said that we won't have Pete Best as the drummer. We're going to get somebody else in, and that's how Ringo.
Yeah.
So all his life he missed out, and Roger,
Totally.
all his success, missed out on being the Beatles hairdresser. Thank you, Roger, for being so slow.
Yeah. So now we want to move on to you being in their home. Before we do, I just want to say, for those of you who remember Peter and Gordon, a duo that had some hit records, Peter
Asher.
Peter, right? Peter Asher is Jane Asher's brother.
Can I just say something before you say that? Really interesting. So, as you mentioned, Peter Asher, I used to do Peter Asher's hair. This is a bit diverse away from this story bit, but Paul McCartney wrote lots of songs, and Lennon, for the Rolling Stones, the Everly Brothers, Rod Stewart. They all sang their songs. And he was getting a bit sort of, are people buying the songs because it's Lennon and McCartney? So with Peter and Gordon, who have already had one #1 hit, he put out an album. He wrote a song for them under the name of Bernard Webb. And if you look at the album, it says Bernard Webb. And what happened to that song? The song was called Woman, and it went to #1 in America and #1 in England. So Bernard Webb, aka Paul McCartney, could be anybody. So that was just a distraction from
that's crazy.
Peter.
Well, let's talk about this when I get home. So this was the first time you cut Paul's hair, was in the home. So tell us a bit about that first meeting. Who answered?
That first meeting was very nervous. I drove over to his house, which is in London, St John's Wood area, a very nice part of the world. I parked my car just a little bit further than Cavendish, near his house, because I was nervous. And I have to go in there and be a professional hairdresser. So I managed to get myself together, press the buzzer, and an Australian, his housekeeper, who's Australian, her husband, who was the gardener come chauffeur. I pressed the bell and she said, "Oh, hello there." She said, "Miss Asher has told me about you, Leslie. Mr. McCartney, very respectful, Mr. McCartney has expected you. Please come in." And I walked, the electric gates open, I walk in, and the first thing I see is an Aston Martin, a green Aston Martin.
Right.
I am, how old am I? I'm 19 years old, and I've only ever seen James Bond. He's the only one that I know that could have an Aston Martin. And there's Paul McCartney. Right, so I walk up and now get myself together and I press the bell on the front door, expecting the Australian housekeeper to open it. And I press it and the door opened and it was Paul McCartney. Didn't give me a chance to go, "Oh, it's Paul McCartney. Hello, Leslie," he said, "James told me all about you. Would you like to come in and would you like a cup of tea?" So I said, "Yes, please." So within minutes, I'm now sitting in Paul McCartney's front room. He went upstairs. As I went through the front room door and I pulled it open, just as I went in, on the left-hand side was the Magritte painting of Au Revoir, which is worth billions of dollars. And I suddenly went, "Oh my God," even I knew that was a painting that should be in the Art National Gallery. And it was plonked behind his behind the door. So I sat there, I then sit down, and I was a mad dog with hairs jumping all over the place. Don't forget, Jane is away. She's down, she's working. And there's a piano there, psychedelic piano. There are bass guitars, acoustic guitars. There's cassettes and all bits and pieces. And I'm sitting there, and the next thing I know, that this lady brings in some tea. McCartney comes down, and I'm sitting there having tea with him, which is a bit surreal. It wasn't like he would be coming into a salon that he would sit down in the chair. I would look in the mirror, look at him, and think, "Well, how am I going to do his hair, or what does he want?" Whatever. This was very casual. And it wasn't until after a while I sort of said to him, I think we better do your hair. How do you want your hair? And he said, "Great." And all 4 Beatles said the same. "Do it as you see it," which is a great thing, because I didn't know. It wasn't like they had makeup artists. It wasn't like they had, stylists around. One of the great things about that time, that they were natural. They came in, they were doing it. And also as well, Judi, that I caught them at a very good time, because I did Paul's hair in September 1966. And 2 weeks before, in Candlestick Park, and I think it was August 27th, in San Francisco, was their very, very last concert. Mm-hmm. So when I see them, Paul comes in. His hair is not looking like Brian Epstein would look like, wanted to look like. He was unshaven, and he had a little bit of start of a moustache, and his hair was a bit longer. And he must have felt great because he didn't have to be a Beatle. He didn't have to be that uniform person that had to get up in the morning, appear on a radio show, TV show, then go on a gig in the evening. This was him at home being Paul McCartney. And so that was my first impressions. Yeah.
One of the things I know about you that you've talked about is, and I think anybody wants this from a hairstylist, but after you cut their hair to make it look like they didn't get a haircut.
That was a secret, yes. The whole secret of a haircut was, you always knew when someone had a haircut because there would be a short back and sides. And I can always remember saying, I used to say, oh, you've had a haircut.
Yeah.
So obvious. The secret of the haircut in those days was, certainly for men, was not to look like you had a haircut. And believe me, that was harder work than giving someone a short haircut.
Right. Before we move on, do you want to say anything about Paul's dog and what her name was?
Paul's, oh yeah. So yeah. That's a good name for a son. Yes, this dog was a lovely dog called Martha. And everyone knows the song Martha, My Dear, was the dog. Funny enough, I was with some people the other day and I was explaining that to them. And they said, was Martha Paul's aunt? And I said, no, actually it was his dog. And in those early days, people actually did not know that Martha was his dog until it came out. So, yeah.
So
hairy dog, a very hairy dog.
Yeah, sheepdog. So as things move on, you started to get some press yourself as the Beatles hairstylist, and that kind of led to another period in 1966 when you cut Paul's hair in a specific way.
This was
Talk about that.
Okay, so as you can see there, one looks like an FBI poster, and the rest is there's Paul McCartney on the left there with a proper Beatle haircut, but his hair was actually longer than that. Okay, so this came about after we said, I'm sitting on his settee having tea. I now have to get into a situation where, right, Paul, where do we do your hair? And he said, we'll do it upstairs in the bathroom. And okay, so we go upstairs. He's got an ensuite bathroom, which I'd never seen before. I had to get Jane's chair from the table into the bathroom. There's a sink, and there is a little mirror. And this is Paul McCartney that could probably have anything in the world, and he's not even batting an eyelid. So I started doing his hair. I did his hair about 2 or 3 times. On the third occasion, it was all very normal, just washed it basically and just trimmed a little bit. On the third occasion, I said to Paul, I haven't seen Jane for a while. And he said, no, she's down in Bristol. She's rehearsing. Well, she's actually filming. She was actually filming with Michael Caine. And I said, oh, amazing. Now you're not working. Are you going to go down and see her, go to the film set? And he said, no, that's not possible because the press will be down there and all they'll be asking is when the Beatles are going to get back together again, what we're doing. And it's not fair for Jane, which is quite, understanding. I'm still doing his hair at the back. Nice. I said, when she finishes filming, I suppose that you'd be nice to go on holiday with her. And again, he gave me the same excuse. No, can't do it. And this time I've got his hair wet, pulled back. I had my hair like that, his hair, and I said, oh, what a shame. I said, why don't you go in disguise? And he said to me, well, how come? Like what? I didn't quite know like what, but my immediate mad thought was, why don't I just cut all your hair off? Because that way, in my head, I'm thinking, if I cut all your hair off, no one's going to know that you're a Beatle, because Beatles have hair. Beatles don't walk around with very short hair. And I sort of said it half-heartedly, and he just looked me in the mirror and just went, go on then, do it. And I went, are you sure? He said, yep. So I cut his hair, and anybody who's had their hair cut from long to short, believe me, you don't start any budding hairdressers out there, don't start from the front. Start from the back, work your way up until the ears are showing. Then the client realizes that the hair is being cut, and then you work it out the rest of it. I cut his hair so short that in this article there, and believe it or not, that's me with a beard.
Yeah.
It said that a skinhead haircut.
Yeah, the barber who made Paul a skinhead.
Yeah. When I left, he didn't say anything. He wasn't like, oh my God, shocked. Thank you very much. I think we even went down and had some tea afterwards. There's always tea afterwards. I left and I thought to myself, okay, Leslie, you've had a good run. You've cut Paul McCartney's hair 3-4 times. There's no way that you're going to go around there again. And my biggest fear was Brian Epstein getting a call from America. Someone's offered billions of dollars for them to appear next week at Shea Stadium, and there's Paul McCartney with a skinhead haircut. I left it, and 6 weeks later, there was an article in the newspaper with pictures of Paul McCartney, Jane Asher, and their road manager, Mal Evans, flying in from a wonderful safari holiday in Kenya. They came back from Nairobi, and when they get to the airport, all the press said, Paul, did you have a great holiday? Did you have a great holiday? Yes. He also got engaged at the same time. So yes, you're now engaged. And who cut your hair? What's happened to your hair? And Mal Evans, the road manager, who I got a big thank you, said, oh, his barber, Leslie Cavendish, did it. And I went, oh my God. That was in the press. And that's how that happened.
How did that, I mean, just as an aside, how old are you at this point? Not even 20?
I was 19.
19. So now there's curiosity about you. You're getting press. You're in with Paul McCartney. What did that feel like?
Well, as I said to you before, I never told anybody. The only one I told was my mum and my grandma. There was no point me telling. I mean, can you imagine me? There used to be press outside his house. Like they used to sort of, the Sunday rag newspapers. They would offer you $100, $500. Can you tell us a story? What's going on?
Yeah.
Can you imagine me coming out and saying, "Oh, hello everybody! I've just cut Paul McCartney's hair." Short.
Yeah.
So I went through the mantra of what Sassoon taught me: keep your mouth shut. So I never told anybody. I never told anybody what I did. I never told. I just didn't tell anybody. So when you say how did I feel, it was a bit frustrating. It wasn't until later on where the first mention came out. I did a fashion shoot for a magazine called Nova, which was a sort of a nice society, good magazine. And in it went Leslie at Vidal Sassoon, who also cut Paul McCartney's hair. And that was like, okay, so people now got to know that I was cutting McCartney's hair, then it came on later. So in the very early days, I kept it to myself.
Yeah, I know when we met, and we're going to go on, you had talked about that being very discreet. I think anybody working with them, if you aren't discreet, you'd be gone. But it was very important to you.
It was very important, very important.
Yeah.
I tell you, I think I said before, I didn't want to do, I didn't want to cut a single. I wanted to cut an album. That's the way I look at it there.
Right. So
Okay.
I think a lot of people may remember this time period where there was a rumor that Paul was dead. You would play the album backwards and it would say Paul is dead. He was barefoot walking on the Abbey Road cover. Tell us about that, what you remember about it.
Yeah, well, this is quite amazing because, even to this day, I'm going on another podcast in about a month's time with a certain person who still thinks I'm part of the conspiracy, along with Jane Asher and along with anybody else that won't go along to say that that Paul McCartney is dead. Paul McCartney is supposed to have had, or did have, an accident in 1966. Funny enough, so 3 weeks before I cut his hair.
Oh,
just
wow.
after 2 weeks. So I'm right there to find out whether this is Mr. McCartney or this is Mr. Billy Shears, I think I would know, okay? Or maybe I don't know. But, you know, every hairdresser who cuts hair has to know one of the basic things on how a hair falls. You know, so my hair falls there, your hair falls slightly to there. Everybody's got that sort of DNA where your hair falls. And Paul McCartney's hair is no different. So I knew that when I put his hair back, where the hair would fall. It's just a normal thing that I knew. But when I was getting this rumor of Paul is dead, one of the big radio stations in America came over to interview me, a guy called Tommy Nutter, who was who actually did the suits for the Abbey Road album, and I think a dentist. Anyway, funny enough, someone sent the actual interview into me a little while ago, and there I was, you know, given the same thing. I told them that I cut Paul McCartney's hair, and his hair was in the same spot, and there's no way that he was dead. And I keep saying, do you not think Jane Asher would know? Do you think not John Lennon would know? Is this brilliant guy, Billy Shears, the most wonderful lover in the world? And is he the greatest songwriter in the world? And that no one knows, and he's a new kid in town? Don't think so. Anyway, I'm cutting Paul's hair again up in the bathroom. I've got his hair wet. And in my mind, I've suddenly had a flash. What happens if his hair doesn't fall where it should fall? Maybe this is the real Billy Shears, and maybe this isn't McCartney. So I started doing it, looking at it, and I just did the normal thing when you got wet hair. I went like that, and I just went, and it just parted. He's looking at me like I'm mad, you know. Well, I don't know what you're thinking. I'm playing around with the hair there. And I said, Paul, I said, I've got something to tell you. And he said, what is it? I said, the good news is that you're not dead. And he went, great. I've been trying to tell people that for ages. Right? So it was a very funny situation. But people, you know, they played the record backwards. There's this picture of Paul with no shoes on. I've got a photo of the Beatles coming the other side of the crossing with his sandals on. All he did was take his sandals off and left it on the curb. You know, people love conspiracies, but I tell you something, it's still happening. It's, you know, people won't believe it, but I promise you out there that McCartney, 81 plus, is still alive and kicking.
I mean, before we move on, I just want to talk a little about, or have you talk about the meanings of different songs. And there was one in particular, which was a song by John. Do you know what I'm talking about? His mother.
Yes, I
Could
do.
you talk a little bit about that before we move on?
Okay, so yes, everyone wants to analyze a Beatles song. They can interpret it which way they like, but I just give you a song that was meant to really be one of John Lennon's vicious attacks. This was who you wouldn't believe it actually, but the Beatles got into transcendental meditation with the Maharishi, and they met him at London Hilton Hotel, and he invited them. He was a lovely man. They used to call him the Smiler, giggling, beautiful long white locks, robe, and he invites them all out to India, along with a singer called Donovan, Sunshine Superman, Mia Farrow and her sister, and Pattie Boyd, George Harrison's wife or girlfriend at the time, her sister Jenny Boyd, who married Mick Fleetwood of Fleetwood Mac, and Maureen Starkey and Cynthia Lennon. Okay, so you've got a nice, and Jane Asher, of course. Everyone's there, they're into meditation, and there was a knock on, I think, Pattie Boyd's door to say that Mia Farrow said, the Maharishi is hassling my sister. It's not very nice. And John Lennon heard about it. And within 2 days, they all left because they didn't like this guy, thought he was the man that could do anything, and everyone would just say, yeah, Maharishi, whatever you want to do. And the girls, the women out there got very frightened by that because they were disillusioned what went on. George stayed on because he met Ravi Shankar, so he was trying to learn the sitar. And the song we're talking about is a song called Sexy Sadie. And Sexy Sadie If you listen to the words, it says, "Sexy Sadie, you made a fool of everyone. You made a fool of everyone. Sexy Sadie, you'll get yours yet." So if anyone wants to listen and read the lyrics to that song, just substitute it for Maharishi.
Yeah.
They're not very nice words. They're very in your face, but that's what Lennon wanted to do. So yeah, that was.
So there was, a lot of, we attribute meanings to things that
Yes.
are completely different. I'm just going to play a clip from a song that I think means a lot to all of us then and may mean something different now. And it doesn't want to. Okay. Not sure.
Okay. One more
but anyway, the song is When I'm 64.
When I'm 64, when I get older, losing my hair many years from now. Okay, so we've got, I had very two funny things that happened to me. We happened to be Lennon and McCartney. So McCartney's hair was a skinhead. I'm now 21 years old, and the Beatles had opened a hairdresser's salon for me in Chelsea, Kings Road, which is a very trendy area. That was financed by the Beatles, so we had a shop of clothes, and we had the basement was the hairdresser salon. I was maybe thinking, maybe a little bit above my station at the time, thinking I knew the ropes, right? And I thought I'd been doing a lot of clients, I'm doing a lot of bands, a lot of this. And I had a client called Caroline Boucher. To this day, I always remember her name. She was the chief senior music writer of the Disc magazine, which is amazing. There was Melody Maker, Enemy, and there was Disc. And between the three of them, they ruled the roost. So she was a senior writer. She was also a client of mine. And she said to me, "Can I interview Leslie regarding the Beatles' texture of their hair? Why don't we go and have a coffee?" That's fine. Sit down and go and have a coffee. And then, I didn't realize that every journalist needs a hook to make a story. No, I didn't think like that. Leslie, tell me, what's George Harrison's hair like? George has got wonderful, luscious hair that you can maneuver around. Ringo, I said, Ringo's hair is great. By the way, Ringo's wife is a hairdresser, so between the two of us, Paul's hair is really good. You can maneuver Paul's hair around. Lovely. And John Lennon's, I went, it's okay. Well, there it was. There was the hook, but I was foolish enough not to see it. So she said, "Oh, you said his hair was okay." So I said, yeah. Well, it's not like the luscious and thick hair like the other three. So I said, "Well, no, it's not quite like that. No, but it's just okay, is it?" "Yeah, it's okay." "Okay, if we move on, mate, let's move on 20 years plus, whatever. Do you think he would be the first Beatle to lose his hair?" I said, "Well, I don't really know that. So maybe." So she said, "But it makes sense, doesn't it? Let's just go 30 years from now. If his hair's not thick enough, he will actually lose his hair first. Possibly." With that, have another cup of coffee, carry on talking. Thank you, Leslie, for the interview. Thank you so much indeed. Thank you, Caroline. Off I go back to the salon thinking, just had an interview. I get a phone call 3 days later from the Beatles press officer, who really, besides Brian Epstein, was the fifth Beatle, a guy called Derek Taylor. And if you needed an interview for the Beatles, you couldn't do it without going through Derek. And if Derek rings you at 9 o'clock on a Thursday evening, you think there's something wrong, unless something wants me to do something. It's unusual. Leslie, what have you said? Derek, please explain yourself. You've said John Lennon's going bald. I said, I didn't say John Lennon's going bald. Oh, yes, you have, because it's in the papers tomorrow morning. It's on the radio being advertised that the Beatles hairdresser Leslie Cavendish said John Lennon's going bald, and you better sort it out. Right. Okay. Now, can you imagine how John Lennon's feeling, let alone if he is going bald? you would think that his hairdresser would have said to him, John, you're losing your hair.
Yeah.
So he's read it. I go to the salon in the morning knowing that I'm going to get this phone call. That's going to be an explosion. I pick the phone up. I could know it's John Lennon. You could tell by the voice. And I went into a sort of a grovel apology, which I thought lasted a minute, but it probably lasted 15 seconds. John, right. I'm so sorry. I didn't do anything. I went out and I ended up just saying, and then John, she took me out of context, you know, and then that word hit something with him. Don't tell me about being taken out of context. Look what happened to me. We're going to America. I'm getting interviewed. And then somebody said to me, do you think you'll fill the stadiums up in America? Yeah. All I said was, we have a very big following in America. We probably get more people going into our concerts than they do at church. Somebody interpreted that down south in Alabama, that to say that the Beatles think they're bigger than Jesus.
Bigger than Jesus, yeah.
And with that, so I'm listening, and then he said, so don't worry about being taken out of context. So I went, oh, great. And then he said to me, now I need to know one other thing. Am I really going effing bald? So I said, no. He said, come over straight away and make sure if there's any hair on the floor, stick it together. So right. You can see there, the big newspaper there, just when you go back, that John Lennon is going bald.
Yeah. Once again, okay. You're getting press aside from the Beatles. Let's talk about this Apple tailoring, salon opening, this rolls. This was a different period. And actually the Beatles financed a salon for you. But just tell us a little bit about this period before we move on.
Very interesting period. So they asked me to, would I like to have a hairdresser salon, which I said, of course I would. So there's John Lennon standing outside, which was Apple tailoring. Mm-hmm. The guy, okay, so the story is we open the shop up and we have a party. And it was the very first time that John Lennon was seen in public with Yoko Ono. And that's John and Yoko on my right on the screen, right walking down the King's Road, Chelsea, coming to the party that we had, and then coming to the shop. And the press were following me everywhere, and John and Yoko were an item. Mm-hmm. Okay. They come into the shop. The one in the middle there is a photo that was taken, and that's John Lennon, obviously. And there's a lady there, still alive. She's 89. Her name's Amanda Lear. She was Salvador Dali's muse. And then you got George Harrison. And then you got a guy who did the tailoring, guy called John Criddle, who was a very, very good designer. And there's me on the end with a hat on. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, so let me just explain the situation regarding the shop. With the shop came a Bentley Continental, which you can see multicolored there, which we had, it was part of the shop. So John, who used to, he wasn't the most nicest of guys, I've got to be honest, a very talented talented clothes designer, but not the nicest of guys. But he used to drive that car. We used to go up and down the King's Road in that car. With whoever was with us there, and it was just a fun car. It's also a very beautiful car. Okay, so John's main claim to fame was that he introduced velvet to men's jackets. So if you see pictures of the Rolling Stones, or certainly Brian Jones, you'll see all beautiful velvet jackets that he'd wear. So when I wasn't doing a client, and I was waiting for a client, all these people would come down. And one of these people was Jimi Hendrix, whose hair I didn't touch. But also downstairs was all the material. There must have been 60 to 80 rolls of velvet, all different colors. And then I was watching John introduce me to Jimmy. Hi, you know, maybe you want your haircut, go to Leslie. He's being measured up, his arms are there, and John's measuring his this, that, and the other. And he turned around to him and said, when he finished the jacket, You're going on a world tour, aren't you, Jimmy? He said, yes. He said, just tell me, he said, is this jacket okay for you? He said, it's great. He said, is there anything else you want? He said, yes, I want this jacket in all those colors. And he took all those colors there. It's amazing, which was really funny. At the salon, the only Beatle I cut there, actually, no, I did cut that, but the one that was regular there each time, he used to get a phone call from his chauffeur, was George Harrison, because they lived down in the country with Lennon, Ringo, and George, and Paul lived in town. So for Paul to get to the offices, which was originally in Wigmore Street, and then he moved on to Savile Row, Paul could probably do it from his house in 20 minutes. The others would take 2 hours, traffic. So all the time that they came up, phone call would come about half an hour before. Just going to park the car, Leslie. George would be coming in, just make sure no one's in there, which was, I made sure. He would come in, he would stay for half an hour. He would sort of relax, get himself together. I used to say to him, my conversation was with him, you know, what you're up to, whatever. He said, no, I'm learning this instrument, the sitar, with this great guy called Ravi Shankar. So he started telling me about all that, and then he was off. It was an amazing little place. It was, you know, you used to get Rod Stewart come in the whole time, and you never knew who would come in with the clothes there.
Right.
It was, and also as well, it was at the time when the King's Road was buzzing. You know, this was before the punk scene came later. This was the days of Mark Bolan, T-Rex. I'm going to just sum it up in one word. It used to be grey skies, but when this all happened, the colour appeared everywhere, and it revolved around the clothes, the environment, the way people are.
Yeah. Magical Mystery Tour, there's lots to talk about. You actually were on the bus. You were on the coach itself, and this was filmed. So tell us about some of the characters.
Okay, so that's me, unfortunately, on Seasby with the little red thing there. I got a cigarette in my mouth, which is
and this is you. And this is you.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, so this happened in 1967, and Brian Epstein had died in August. I was asked to go to McCartney's house. I can't quite watch whether it was for a haircut or I'm not sure it was, he wanted to see me as a meeting, but anyway, I ended up round there, and we were talking, and I wanted to offer my condolences, you know, regarding Brian Epstein. I didn't quite know how to do it. So I walked in, I remember, and, you know, said, I'm really sorry to hear the loss of Brian Epstein. He said, yes, you know, he was a father to us, we'll miss him, whatever. And he was going on. He said, and by the way, what are you doing in 2 weeks' time? Conversation just went like that. I said, why? I'm working, basically, I'm working. And he said, well, we're going down on a coach, you know, all of us, and we're going to take some of the fan club members. There'll be about, altogether, about 50 of us. Would you like to come with, be part of the crew, and you could do our hair at the same time? Of course I would say yes. You know, one of the things I was excited about was that I'd seen Paul McCartney individually. I had seen, I think I haven't said that before, but one of the things I decided not to do was ever ask for their autograph or take their hair. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be that type of person, because I knew I was into something special and I could be trusted, which I was being trusted, because I was taken into that slightly inner circle where I could be discreet. And but I never saw the Beatles on stage, except when I saw them on stage. I never went on the road with them to see how they interact. This would be the first time that I would see all 4 Beatles in a coach. And that excited me. I wanted to see, let's see how this banter works, whatever. So I was told to meet on a cold September day. Met Paul McCartney in a place called Allsop Place. Anyone been in London? It's right opposite Badminton Two Swords, which is just by Baker Street. I arrive at 8 o'clock in the morning. There's Paul McCartney sitting on the floor, and the guy sitting next to me in the middle with the hat at the end, a guy called Ivor Cutler. who goes under the name of Mr. Blood Vessel in the movie. He's sitting on the floor with Paul McCartney. And they're all people going to work. And I'm seeing young girls walking by and then having a double take, thinking, no, that can't be Paul McCartney sitting on the floor, which it was. Finally, we're trying to, now we're moving on, and the coach hasn't arrived. And Paul says to me, right, the coaches still haven't been painted. Now, don't forget, no one's seen the coach. So when it means being painted, we got no idea. A coach is a coach.
Yeah.
So we go along and have a cup of tea in the transport cafe across the road, which I've now got loads of photos of me sitting with Paul in the canteen with people asking for his autograph. We finally get on the coach, turns up, and Paul, we're going to pick up John, George and Ringo down in Weybridge where they lived, which is about an hour and a quarter away. And as they get on the bus, if anyone's ever seen the film, Ringo's sort of got sort of the main part there because he's sitting next to this lovely lady called Aunt Jess, who's a large lady, and they're screaming, and it's his aunt, and they're screaming and shouting throughout the whole period. And it was absolutely fascinating. And I mentioned to you this before, Judi. I regard Paul McCartney as the conductor of the Beatles, because if we look at it, George didn't really have the time to have his songs played.
Yeah.
Right? So he was frustrated. John was going through, left his wife and gone with Yoko. So his life is changing.
Mm-hmm.
George and Ringo is with his wife, and he doesn't know what to do. He's going from one side to the other. As long as he could play drums, so he got into going into movies and everything there. So the only real one that wanted to be a Beatle and wanted to keep it together was McCartney, because otherwise they would have just sort of disbanded. But what I saw was that when we stopped, lots of things, we had lunch and things, I did see that banter between four guys that have been friends for 1958.
Yeah.
And you saw the unity. So like any marriage where we all have disagreements and arguments and things, it's no different in being in the band. And,
I
at the end of the day, the music.
Yeah. Also, I mean, they together went through an experience that nobody else could truly understand. But you bring up a good point at this juncture, and we're going to get to this now. There were issues between the four of them for various reasons. And this slide refers to, there's a documentary many of you may have seen. If you haven't seen it, it's on Disney Plus. It's called Get Back. It was created out of tons of footage that were found about the Beatles in this last creation of an album and songs. It's really wonderful. And it culminates in this rooftop concert. And you were actually there. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so as I say, this was in 1969, right? The Beatles hadn't played live to an audience since August 66.
Mm-hmm.
They, as I said, their lives were moving on. They weren't talking to each other at one stage. Paul had met Linda. Yeah. The situation with Jane Usher disintegrated. Paul's fault. He met Linda. Linda's parents or father is New York lawyers who really top-notch lawyers. Happens to be Paul McCartney's father-in-law, which didn't please the other three. They wanted to go with something called Alan Klein. So there was all this sort of not talking. George had left the band, so this is disruption everywhere.
And Yoko was a bigger part of.
Yoko was a part of it, but not the part.
Right.
Probably the one who was the part was Lennon. Lennon's the one that actually was the first person to say the Beatles didn't exist, except that that was kept quiet by a good friend of mine called Ray Connolly, who had the interview 6 months before Paul McCartney said the Beatles don't exist. So it was Lennon that wanted to break away. But like all good things, they had a lot of music, and they wanted to get this album out, Let It Be, and then it was Get Back. And where are we going to do it? To promote it. They thought about the place in Jordan. They thought about going to do it at the Colosseum in Rome. They thought about doing it in a place in London called the Roundhouse, which they even advertised to say that the Beatles will be appearing here to perform their new album. Never materialized. For lots of, and then the other one we wanted to do it on the Queen Elizabeth, London to New York. The one that stopped it all was there was always an objection, and George Harrison did not want to travel. He wanted basically to do this gig and start writing his own songs and get out, whatever. And he said, no, I don't want to travel. I don't want to do this. And he saw something happen. I think it was Jefferson Aeroplane about a year before, did it on a big store in New York. I'm not sure if it was Macy's or whatever, but they did a little gig on a roof. And he said, why don't we do it at the offices here? Why not? You've got all the equipment here. So that's how that started.
And the offices were Apple Studios.
In 3 Savile Row was the, yeah, not the studios, it was
Not
their
the studio, Apple Records.
yeah, where Apple Records came out, yeah. So they went up on the roof. No, I then get a phone call. My girlfriend at the time was George Harrison's PA, a lady called Chris O'Dell. I'm still working in Chelsea. I would often get a phone call either from Peter Asher or from her or from somebody to say, Leslie, can you come over to the office and cut someone's hair? Those someone's hair were times James Taylor. It would be lots of other people coming in that either made it or didn't make it. And
we should say that part of the reason they were there is James Taylor, I don't know if it was his first album, but Apple Records produced.
Yes, and the person that produced it was Peter Asher. Peter Asher was the cog there. He was the one that saw it. And he rang me at that particular time to do James Taylor. But anyway, so Chris rings me up and she says, Leslie, why don't you come over? Something's interesting going on. And I'm thinking that maybe there's someone really good there that I'm going to cut their hair. So I get all my equipment, come over, get in the cab from Chelsea to into Mayfair. I don't know, 15 minutes by cab. I walk in. They all know me there. Fine. Hi, Leslie. Hi. Nothing really, the place was always buzzing. Anyway, I climb up there, is 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5 floors and then a roof. Forget the roof. I've got no idea what's going on there. I go to the 4th floor and bless him, Mal Evans, the guy that said to the press that Leslie cut Paul's hair, is a big bloke. He was at the bottom of the stairs and he was handing somebody some heavy wires and amplifiers are going upstairs. And I went, hi, Mal. Fine. Didn't really say hello to him. He was so busy, preoccupied. I went to go on the stairs to go up. And he said to me, no, you can't go up there. There's too many people on the roof. And I said, but Chris is up there. She told me she's up there. No, there's too many people on the roof. Okay, no big deal. I wait downstairs under the roof. Got no idea what's going on. And I'm just waiting. I'm actually waiting for Chris to come down to introduce me to whose hair I'm going to cut. Wait 20 minutes. And the next thing I hear is Jojo is a girl from Tucson, Arizona. I went, whoa, where's that coming from? I didn't, for a moment, I didn't think that it was coming. I didn't know where it was coming from. And if you play it, it was.
Slides to go.
I just tell you that, Judy, that particular day was a very cold day. And Ringo is wearing a red plastic raincoat borrowed from his wife, Maureen. John has borrowed Yoko's fur jacket. And George has borrowed a little coat from Patty. But the only one that wants to be the cool guy, and to me, he looks the best, He's got his beautiful Tommy Nutter suit on. He's got hair by me, and he's got a great jet black beard. I love it.
Oh, let me just play a little. I could keep going. But the thing about this is it was sort of thought to be the last time they performed together, right? And the question is, was it really the end?
So just before that, when the whole idea of that to be the press officer's idea, he wanted the Beatles to get arrested to walk out of Apple offices with handcuffs, and that would be the best present there, best publicity. That didn't happen, but when that final concert was finally finished, which they did 9 songs, John Lennon went over to the microphone, looked beyond, and just said to everybody, well, I hope you enjoyed the concert, and I hope we passed the audition.
Yeah.
And they were the last words for the Beatles to actually, I don't know if you can see that.
Okay, I so couldn't get that clip,
you would think that that is the last concert. Well, was it?
I don't know.
1997, a few years ago, when John Lennon died, he left a package of two cassettes with 3 songs on. One was called Free as a Bird, and the other one was called Real Love, and the other one was called Now and Then. Now, Peter Jackson, as you rightly pointed out before, did the film Get Back, the new version, and used the latest AI technology. And he saw that song was recorded by John Lennon. It was so rough, it was so crackly, that he and Giles Martin, which is George Martin's son, managed to, in their brilliance, to perform the last song of the Beatles. It not only came out, it became a #1 hit around the world. And we're talking a long time ago, and not many bands have ever done that. So please.
That was really the last time they played together. And as we can see, the remaining Beatles, Ringo and Paul, were very much involved in putting this together. Well, that takes us to the end of this presentation. There are many, many more stories. Leslie's written a book called The Cutting Edge. It's available. You can see this BeatlesBookstore.com if you want to read more. In Spanish, it's BeatlesHairdresser.com. And if we have questions, let me see if there are any questions to go through. One of the things that somebody asked, and I know that one thing I do want to mention, I spent some time with Leslie in London, and he is very discreet, even though now many of these stories are coming out. He's not telling stories that sort of haven't been out there. You're still very discreet about certain things that you would never tell. But one thing that somebody wanted to know is, what is something about Paul McCartney that most people don't know, if anything?
What he doesn't know is that he doesn't like football. That really
He doesn't like football?
No, or soccer. You know, the Beatles are from Liverpool. At that very time, Liverpool were the #1 soccer team in Europe, let alone anywhere else. So if you come from Liverpool, you're either a blue or you're a red. Blue for Everton, so you become an Evertonian, which Paul's dad was, or you're a red, you're a Liverpudlian. So my first sort of questions to Paul would be, are you a blue or a red? He said, my dad was a blue. And so no passion, no football, no for there.
Wasn't into it.
I'm very surprised about that. I was surprised. I was also surprised that an instance that happened, and it's out there in the public. As I said to you before, I didn't want their autographs, I didn't want their hair, But one of the things I did ask Paul for, which I'm eternally grateful for, was to ask if I could watch them record or watch them rehearse. And he allowed me to go to Abbey Road Studios, and which I did many occasions. And I remember going there for the first time. So don't forget, I'm seeing things that maybe the public don't know, but that little circle would know. But I didn't know that Paul was a he could play any instrument, from drums to piano to guitar, you name it, he can play it. I didn't know that. I just thought he was a bass player. And I can remember a situation where I'm in the booth upstairs, the engineer's room. They had the engineer there, a guy called Jeff Emmerich. And then you had the producer, George Martin. And I'm sitting there, obviously, again, just observing, watching what's going on. And Ringo was on the drums, sitting on the booth on top. Paul was in his booth there. And obviously, before I came, Ringo was playing a beat to a song that Paul wanted. And suddenly I heard Paul shout out, "No, not like that. That's not the way you do it." And he literally got up, went over to Ringo, he did. He sort of snatched his drumsticks out of his hand and said, "No, I want it like this." Now, that was fine. He's probably done that 1,001 times. But he never did it when I was around. And Ringo saw that, and I was kindly asked to leave the rehearsal session. That was something I didn't know about. That was something I could have easily told the press about.
Yeah.
That surprised me. That surprised me in a nice way. That's why I always say I would imagine that if you are writing a song and you know exactly how you want it. And as I said before, Paul McCartney's house is a 5-minute walk to Abbey Road Studios. So if him and Lennon are writing a song and John's gone back to his home, which is 2 hours away, and Paul's sitting at home thinking, no, not like that. I'll quickly go around to the studio. So he knows what he was doing.
Yeah.
How can you argue with somebody who writes a song and that's how I want it? That surprised me.
Yeah, and this is the kind of thing, if people haven't seen the documentary shows a lot of footage that kind of expands on that idea of what you just described. And it really speaks to the tension that they as a group had gotten to at that point. But thank you so much, Leslie. This was wonderful.
Thank you. You could have a budding career. I think as an interviewer, you're absolutely done.
I did.
I thank you.
But no more. So one of the comments was that the last song was so moving and technically so clever. And it was. And it I hope for all of you out there, this helped to relive some memories, get some insights into the interaction with the Beatles, and also just appreciate somebody who is in on the inside, and a great storyteller.
Thank you. I want to thank you and your team, especially Kathy and Judy Wise. You know who I mean. So thank you very much for the invite. Thank you everybody who did listen to this. I thank you all very much indeed, and have it's evening time for me here, so it's probably afternoon. So have a really good afternoon.
Okay.
Look forward. Maybe we'll do a part 2. Who knows?
Yes, maybe. Got a couple other comments. Excellent presentation. This was delightful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree. All right. Thank you. Thank you all for attending.
Good night, everybody. Thank you very much.